Morning. I've seen a lot of visitors this morning, and I continue to see a lot of visitors come our way. That's always exciting, and we are glad that you have chosen to be with us and visit with us, and I hope that you will stay around and give us an opportunity to get to meet you, and I hope that you will consider this family if you're looking for a church home. I will say this, and I always put this disclaimer on things when I'm talking with visitors, is if you do come here and you decide to be a part of our family, we expect you to go to work. Because God expects you to go to work. We don't need evaluators and pew sitters. We need people who are working for the kingdom. I hope that doesn't scare you away. This is a wonderful congregation that is seeking to work hard for the Lord. You know, I hope I don't embarrass him, but Mike Thornton's a prime example of that. You know, he wanted to do the communion focus because he said, I want my boys to see me doing this. I want to raise them watching me lead and do things like this. And I think that's a wonderful spirit, and I think it really is indicative of the spirit that we have here at Oldham Lane. And so you're visiting with us. Thank you for being here, and I hope you'll consider us. You know, we're involved in a series entitled The Armor of God. It's actually called Stronger, the Armor of God, and we're looking at the different elements of the armor that Paul describes in Ephesians chapter 6. And this morning we continue with that series by looking at the shield of faith. You know, warfare throughout the ages has been about adapting and adjusting. It's been about looking at the schemes and strategies of the opponent and devising weapons and strategies based on those of the opponent. And you see that with the mother tank, which effectively put an end to trench warfare. You see it with impenetrable walls and moats, and then came the trebuchet. You see it with the bow and arrow, which was a weapon that brought out fear and was very successful in many wars and battles used by the Huns and the Mongols. And because of the bow and arrow came about the shield, really. That was the primary reason why it was invented. What do we often think of when we think of a shield? Kind of Captain America, right? This circular metal piece that has a sleeve or handle that the soldier would hold up in one hand and fight with a sword in the other. That's not the type of shield that Paul would be describing if he was making a relation between the Roman soldier's armor and spiritual armor that the Christian puts on. Now, the armor that the Roman soldier would have used would have looked more like a large metal door. And it would be planted firmly in the ground with handles or a handle on the back of it, and the soldier would get behind it to try to withstand the fiery darts that were shot by the enemy. You see, a Roman soldier had good armor that covered most of the body, but there's no way it could cover every piece of the body. If it did, it would render him immobile, and that was not desirable on the field of battle, obviously. And so he had good armor, but not complete armor, so to speak. The enemy recognized this and would use the bow and arrow, shoot arrows in that Roman soldier's direction, hoping to find a spot where there was no armor and penetrate it, and thus render the soldier wounded or perhaps even kill him. And so the shield came about as a way of protecting. Well, the enemy decided to go a step further with the bow and arrow concept, and they started taking the arrow with a hollow shaft and filling it with flammable fluid and then lighting the end of it. That's the fiery darts that we see Paul making reference to here in a spiritual sense. In a physical sense, these fiery darts would be shot in the direction of the Roman soldier, hoping that it would shatter on their armor and catch them on fire, or on their shield and catch it on fire. And so the Roman soldier, in response, took that shield, covered it in leather that was soaked in water, so that when that fiery dart hit it, it would shatter, but then quickly be put out. Necessity is the mother of invention, and we see that over and over again in warfare. What we also see in our daily spiritual lives, in the spiritual struggle that we're involved in, is that Satan is constantly firing his darts of temptation in our direction. Remember in Matthew chapter 4, when Satan fired his fiery darts at the Lord? After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, the devil approaches Jesus, commanding him to turn those stones into bread. Jesus was hungry, and he could give himself quickly something to eat by just performing a miracle right then and there. But Jesus knew the motives of the devil and why he was tempting him to do this, and so he answers, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that proceeds from the mouth of God." Now, we know that Satan doesn't give up. He continues launching his fiery darts in Jesus' direction. The second temptation is one of honor and selfishness. In essence, Satan says, gain for yourself the honor that you deserve. Take control. Throw yourself from the pinnacle of this temple. God will not allow you to fall. The people will see the miracle, and they will immediately bow down and worship you. But Jesus, of course, doesn't succumb to the temptation. He says once again, it is written, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test. Then, in one last-ditch effort, Satan offers Jesus a dazzling shortcut method. He wants to give him a crown without having to endure the cross. Basically telling him he'll give him everything he wants anyway and everything he'll gain through the cross if he'll just bow down and worship him. Once again, Jesus is not hit by these fiery darts. He says, go, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only. My friends, our faith can shield us just as it did Jesus from Satan's fiery darts. In fact, we must have this shield of faith planted firmly in the ground, and we need to get behind it, or else we risk having that arrow penetrate our hearts. Every one of us, I think, knows what it's like to be hit. I think every one of us has been hit on probably more than one occasion by Satan's fiery darts. And I think our hearts can be like that dry pile of wood waiting to be set ablaze by the dart of temptation. The arrow strikes, and immediately our heart is engulfed with the flames of greed or lust or gossip or whatever it may be. And with the arrow flaming and lodged in our hearts, our shield didn't allow it to be deflected. It stuck, and suddenly we have succumbed to temptation. As we talked about last Sunday night, temptation gives birth to sin and then to death. What good is a shield if we never employ it? What good is a shield if we don't get behind it? No one tries to use a shield after the fact. You've got to be proactive. Temptation, understand, is not sin. Remember, Jesus was tempted in all points and yet did not sin. I've actually had people tell me, well, Jesus wasn't like us. He certainly wasn't tempted like us. And I said, certainly he was. If he wasn't, he's not worthy to be my Savior. He was tempted in every way and yet was without sin, and we can learn some things from Jesus in the way that we can handle temptation as well. Temptation in and of itself is not sin, but when it's given into, then it becomes sin, and then of course leads to death, as James wrote, then when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death. And as we said last week, we have to cut off the process in its earliest stages. We start with temptation. If we don't handle temptation effectively, we're not going to be effective in stopping this process. Notice what Paul writes in Romans 13. The night is almost gone and the day is near. Therefore, let us lay aside the deeds of darkness and put on the armor of light. Let us behave properly as in the day, not in carousing and drunkenness, not in sexual promiscuity and sensuality, not in strife and jealousy. But put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for the flesh in regard to its lust. Again, Paul uses the imagery of armor here. He says that Christians must put on the armor of light. Later says that we are to put on Jesus Christ. Understand that in the first century Rome, the idea of putting on a person meant putting on their very characteristics, their personality, all of those things. The Greeks used to say, put on Plato or put on Socrates, meaning put on their characteristics, become like them. Like the one you follow, think like them, act like them, have the same characteristics as they do. And so the question becomes, have we put on Christ? Do we think like Him? Do we act like Him? Do we speak like Him? Do we take on His characteristics? That should be the goal of each and every one of us. And along with putting on Christ, Paul says, make no provision for the flesh in regard to its lust. We make provision for something when we provide for it. And so if we don't want to give in to temptation, then we can't provide for the temptation. We can't supply it. We've got to cut off the process early. When I was living in Charlotte, Arkansas, we had this woodpecker that would wake me up every morning. And he would drill incessantly on this telephone pole just outside my window. Woodpeckers are very interesting creatures. You ever seen one? They peck and peck, they drill and drill, trying to find a soft spot in the wood so that they can eat bugs that are found in there. And if they drill and drill and they can't find a soft spot, they just move over a little bit and they start again. They don't give up. They're very persistent. And I liken that to Satan and what he does on our hearts. He drills and drills incessantly, trying to find a soft spot. And once he finds a soft spot, he makes a home there. And he eats away at us. So what is it specifically that we can do in order to withstand the fiery darts that Satan launches at us? Here are some things that I hope you'll write down, you'll take note of, and try to apply to your daily life. I think the very first thing that we can do is just be stubborn. You know, that sounds so elementary, it sounds so basic, but if we're going to resist, then we have to remember that in order to resist, we have to draw some boundaries. We have to draw some hard lines in the sand. In Titus chapter 2, verses 11 through 12, Paul writes, "For the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation to all men, instructing us to deny ungodliness or worldly desires, and to live sensibly, righteously, and godly in the present age." You know, we talked about a couple of weeks ago, desiring righteousness. Do you hunger and thirst for it? Hunger and thirst are the greatest needs that a person will ever have. And if you've ever been really hungry or really thirsty, you know that you cannot function until those drives or those appetites are met, until your hunger is satisfied, until your thirst is quenched. It's hard to even go on. And if left unattended to, eventually it will leave you dead. James writes, "Submit therefore to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you." And so the first step in taking a stand against Satan is being stubborn. Draw a line in the sand. Plant your shield firmly in the ground. Get behind it and take this seriously. Too many times we don't take it seriously. Many times we don't say no to sin. We don't give a direct no. We simply say maybe, or we're tentative. We don't take a hardline approach to sin. We dance around it. Unfortunately, sometimes we just let it in without saying anything. It's hard to argue with no, folks. We had a salesman come by our house, been several months ago. This lady was selling a carpet shampooer for like $3,000. And in order to sell it, as part of her pitch, she said she would like to come in and clean 2 rooms in our house free, no obligation. Well, we were actually going to do that anyway, so why not let her do it for free instead of paying to have it done? So we let her come in, and after what seemed like a long time, she finished the 2 rooms, shampooing the carpet, and it looked really good. But there's no way we were going to spend $3,000 on a carpet cleaner. So she left, and then the closer came in, the guy that was there to seal the deal, so to speak. And I opted out. I was in my room doing something, and I left Libby to fend for herself. And she did well. She did well. But he wouldn't take no for an answer. He came back several times. Finally, he left and came back, and he had reduced it down from $3,000 to $250. Now, he was going to lose money, but he was going to basically let us have this carpet shampooer. And I heard Libby go, "You're just going to have to talk to my husband." And by this time, I was upset that he was trying to take advantage of her, that he wouldn't leave. And so I walked in, he started in, and I said, "Nope, you're done, you need to leave." And he walked out the door, very mad, very incensed that we, wasted his time, so to speak. But hey, they offered, right? It's hard to argue with no. If you dilly-dally around, if it's maybe, or if you're tentative, that doesn't work. It certainly doesn't work with the devil. But when you draw a hard line, you say, "No, that's it, get out. Get out of my home, get out of my heart, get out of my mind. I don't want anything to do with you. You've stayed long enough. Get out of here." That's how you deal with a salesman. That's how you deal with Satan as well, right? It's hard to argue with no. Also, a second critical piece of strategy is to make up your mind ahead of time. Be stubborn, but make up your mind ahead of time. When it comes to sin, most often the prior thought is what should receive the blame for our actions. Don't you agree? What we think about, what we allow our minds to dwell upon more than anything else is going to determine how strong we are, how powerful our uncontrolled thoughts. I think we know the answer to that. Notice what is written in Genesis 6, starting in verse 5. "Then the Lord saw that wickedness of man was great on the earth," and listen to this, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. The Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. Thoughts motivate actions. The idea that it's okay for me to think evil so long as I don't do evil is a lie from the father of lies. Where we leave ourselves unprotected is where Satan is going to weasel in. And certainly our minds is a crucial battleground, the biggest playground for the devil. We see that Paul wrote, we are destroying speculations and every lofty thing raised up against the knowledge of God, and we are taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. Oftentimes we give in to temptation because we haven't decided ahead of time what we're going to do when the pressure is on. And so we cave because we don't have a plan. Have a plan, have a strategy. When Daniel was still in his teens, he was being deported from Jerusalem to the court of a foreign king, and he knew he was in trouble because the food he was going to have to eat there was not on God's menu. And he made up his mind ahead of time that he would not defile himself. Before he even faced the demands of the king, he decided he wasn't going to partake. Notice what Daniel says, or chapter 1, verse 8 of Daniel. But Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine which he drank. So he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he might not defile himself. What's interesting here is that phrase, made up his mind, in the Hebrew is a word that describes the making of a rope. Rope makers would take these different fibers and they would twist them together into one strong cord that was hard to break. And that's exactly what Daniel did. He got the different fibers from around him, the wisdom, the integrity, the honor. He twisted it all together and he made a strong cord that couldn't be broken no matter what. He was stubborn and he made up his mind ahead of time, this isn't for me. And I'm going to say no regardless of the consequences. Could have cost him his life, but he did it anyway because he had drawn a hard line in his heart that he wasn't going to cross. And we must do the same. Don't wait for the music of temptation to start playing before you decide what you're going to do about it. Take a stand before Satan comes. Make plans ahead of time. Protect your mind and heed the words of Paul. Philippians 4 and 8. Finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good repute, if there's any excellence and if anything worthy of praise, dwell on those things, not on the filth that is in the world around you. Another component in defeating Satan is staying engaged. It's not enough to be sober or be stubborn. It's not enough to make up your mind ahead of time if you don't stay engaged. This is a daily fight, a daily struggle, as we have talked about over and over again in this series. All too often, we let our guard down and find that the devil is waiting for that opportunity. Temptation often comes in our weakest moments, not in our strongest. Remember that Jesus' temptation came after he had spent 40 days and he was hungry. He wanted something to eat. He was thirsty. He was weak. And that's when the devil decided to attack. When Elijah took on the 450 prophets of Baal, the devil didn't bother trying to tempt him with discouragement. He waited until after that confrontation, after Elijah had run the 20 miles back to Jezreel. Then Elijah was hit with Jezebel's murderous threats. And you imagine that Elijah was extremely exhausted, that he was in a weakened state, which is precisely why the devil chose that moment, I believe. Elijah's defenses crumbled and he gave way to discouragement. It's hard for Satan to get our full attention when our attention is focused fully on God. But once that goal or that task has been accomplished, we let our guard down and Satan fires his darts at us. Many times we're vulnerable, we're unguarded. We need to make sure that we are constantly protecting ourselves. Peter describes the devil as a roaming lion, a roaring lion. In the book of Job, we see God speaking to Satan and Satan telling him that he's been walking to and fro, looking for someone to test. The word Satan there in the Hebrew means accuser. That's what he is. He's an accuser. He's looking for somebody to test, and certainly Job was offered up in that occasion. We need to see the devil as that prowling lion, that roaming lion, seeking someone to devour. We can't be the weak prey. We have to stand firm and stay engaged. A moment's weakness can have tragic consequences. We need to keep moving forward in our faith. In verse 9 of 1 Peter chapter 5, Peter writes, "But resist him, firm in your faith." Peter closes out his second letter with these words, "But grow in the grace and knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ." It's like riding a bike. As long as you're pedaling, you're okay. But the moment you stop, you're going to fall over. Same is true here. Keep pedaling, keep striving, keep moving forward, keep climbing the ladder of maturity in your faith, making certain that you're constantly growing and maturing, staying focused on the goal or the task at hand and not letting your guard down. It's like the man who refused to have internet, and his friend thought it was absurd. He couldn't email him. He couldn't get on Facebook with him. He said, "You're missing out. There's all these wonderful things on the internet, and you're choosing not to opt in." And the guy says, "That's just one more temptation I don't want to have to deal with." There's a lot of plausibility there, right? This man knew that it would provide another temptation. He had enough temptation in his life. You know, if you're somebody who's made of dynamite, you don't go stoking blast furnaces. If you're someone who has a problem with internet pornography, you can't have internet. If you're someone who is attracted to someone in your job that's not your mate, you need to quit your job or take a transfer or something. Too radical? Not as radical as losing your soul. Whatever it takes to be stubborn, make up your mind ahead of time and stay engaged, stay focused. Don't have that moment of weakness that you let your guard down, because it's not always just some momentary, fleeting sin, even though that's bad. A lot of times there are eternal consequences and even earthly consequences that come along with it. Can't tell you how many people that I've counseled with, that I've talked to, who are dealing with tough earthly circumstances and consequences because of one moment of weakness. Don't fall into that trap. You know, I think we need to carefully review our lives with an eye toward highlighting those things that facilitate sin. And then we need to consider if the activity is worth the struggle, especially if it's contributing to regular defeats. Is there something like that in your life that you're engaging in and it's not worth the struggle, that it's contributing to regular defeats? Why are you still engaging in it? Why is it still an option for you? Suppose you have 1,000-acre property that you want to sell to somebody, and you have a buyer, they purchase that 1,000 acres, but you want to keep 1 acre in the middle of it. Right smack dab in the middle of that 1,000 acres, you want to keep that 1 acre right in the middle. Now, the law allows you to build a road so you can get to that piece of property. Even across the property you sold, you can still build a road to get there. If you want to stay away from that piece of property, what are you going to do? Not build a road, right? You're not going to provide access to that piece of property. And the same is true with us when it comes to sin or temptation. Don't provide access. Don't provide a road for Satan to come in. Don't supply the flesh. Don't make provision for the flesh, and you won't falter. Also, we need to be accountable. When sin takes place in private and never comes to light, we often fool ourselves, don't we? We rationalize. We don't take our sin as seriously as we should. I think we all need to seek a trusted friend to confide in. Go to him or her, confess your sin, ask them to help you, ask them to keep you accountable. Obviously, it takes a special friend to fill that kind of role, but I think we could all use some one-on-one accountability. We could all use someone who is willing to check up on us, to see how we're doing, to confront us if needed, not for the purpose of necessarily condemning us, but for the purpose of helping us. Not letting God down should be enough motivation, but so often it's not. It's good to have someone there to hold us accountable, a trusted friend that won't let us skate by. The wise Solomon wrote these words, "Two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. For if either of them falls, the one will lift up his companion, but woe to the one who falls when there is not another to lift him up." Everyone needs a trusted friend to lift them up when they fall, to help hold them accountable as they tread that narrow path. Christian friends are an enormous blessing. They are an invaluable tool in helping us fight the devil. I have an acquaintance that unfortunately fell into a bad situation. You know, I say that like he didn't choose it. He did choose it. He didn't fall into it. He chose it. And it was a sin that was pretty well public, and I talked to one of his friends about it, and he said, hey, that's his business. I'm not getting involved there. That's his life. I'll let him live it. My friends, I hope we don't take that attitude. As Christians, that's not the attitude we should have. As Christians, our attitude should be to help our brothers or sisters. And if they're caught in incessant or persistent sin, we need to confront them. We need to do so in love, but we need to confront them and let them know, look, this can't happen. You can't continue to do this. Do we love them enough to tell them the truth so they don't risk losing their soul for all eternity? Jesus said, for where 2 or 3 have gathered together in my name, I am there in their midst. The presence of Jesus in the presence of others is a powerful thing. God is there to hold us accountable, but sometimes we need reminding of that from our Christian brothers and sisters. You know, there is a certain kind of ant that absolutely loves the sugary secretions that come from a particular caterpillar of a large blue butterfly. The ants love this substance that's secreted from this caterpillar so much that they're obsessed with it. They'll actually go to the caterpillar, pick it up, and take it back to their nest. And they'll engorge themselves on this substance that it's secreting. Now, the caterpillar loves this because the caterpillar's favorite food is ant larvae. And so it's more than willing to let the ant carry them to their nest, and it engorges itself on all of the ant larvae that's around. And the ants, which would normally mobilize and attack, are totally oblivious to the genocide going on around them because they are so addicted to that substance that this caterpillar is giving off. I think that's a similar illustration for how we can be sometimes as Christians. Sometimes we are so addicted to the instant gratification that the devil offers that we'll invite him right into our home. We'll provide him access right into our hearts. My friends, that can't happen. It's time for us to mobilize and attack. We can't afford to be oblivious to what is going on around us because we're too focused on things that are sinful, things that are leading away from Christ. We don't need to give the devil an open door of opportunity. We need to be stubborn. We need to make up our minds ahead of time. We need to draw some hard lines in the sand. We need to say no and mean it. We need to stay engaged and not let our guard down. We need to be accountable and hold each other accountable. We got to have a plan, and we got to have a strategy. Because you know as well as I do, without a plan or without a strategy, we're going to be defeated. And some of you sitting here this morning may be defeated already. Some of you are sitting here this morning as a casualty of war, and let us help you. You know, I hesitate to say the church is a hospital because people don't like hospitals, but it should be a healing place. It should be a place that you can come for healing. We want to be that place. And it may be that you've never had an action plan, that you have been succumbing to sin and to the devil over and over again, that you've been serving him as your master, and you're ready to change that. You're ready to transfer your ownership. You're ready to transfer allegiance to the one and only one who can save you. If you're ready to do that, we want to help you with that this morning as well. Whatever your need is, come now as we stand and as we sing.